We're honored to be here today with retired CW4 Brandon Budge. He's got a heck of a rotary wing background. He's a rotor head like me. Brandon, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, of course.
So let's start off with your background. It's pretty impressive. So tell us what you did in the service.
I don't know how impressive it is, but I was a Black Hawk pilot, and we always joked that with enough bananas you could teach a monkey to fly. Um,
They
so
do
I
that
was
at Fort
black.
Rucker, I think.
Yeah, I did go to Fort Rucker. Mother Rucker is what we
Yeah,
referred to it as, not
exactly,
lovingly though.
exactly.
So um, I was a Black Hawk pilot. I became a maintenance test pilot. I mostly worked with air assault units, except for just a short time when I went over to Egypt and I was with the
Hmm.
multinational force and observers, and I flew Black Hawks there. And then I was a pilot in command, of course, and um, an air mission commander.
And
So
that was air assault missions. Is that?
yeah, well, air assault, we uh, we started lovingly calling them disappointment ops because we
Yeah,
were trying to transition to an Afghani military force and trying to teach them what how things needed to look.
yeah,
And we saw how effective that was with that absolutely miserable withdrawal that
yeah, yeah.
left service members wounded and then some of them dead. Something that did not need to happen at all.
I completely agree with you
So,
there. So I initially contacted you because of the vaccine. So let's start there. Um, what's been your experience with the whole mandatory injection?
um, it was just something that was entirely different from what I had experienced before, or what many of the people, and of course I only speak for myself, but what
Hmm.
many of the people had experienced prior to um, that particular, the COVID-19 um, shot. So
Yeah,
I hate calling it a vaccine because we all learned that that's absolutely not what it was. It didn't
yeah,
produce the results that they were looking for. In fact, the results that it did produce were oftentimes negative. Um, but you know, it, before that, if somebody was late on a flu shot or somebody, I knew a guy. I don't want to give any names out, but for religious reasons, he had always been opposed to vaccines.
hmm,
And he was never treated in the way that, for some reason, when this shot came out, that people were treated. Everybody gave him the space necessary to put in his religious exemptions and kind of make his case. He wasn't ostracized. Everybody appreciated him. Everybody appreciated that he stuck to his beliefs, and that was the end of it. And if you were late on a flu shot, they would tell you, hey man, we can't sign your leave because you got to get this flu shot done.
hmm.
But when the COVID-19 shot came out, it was almost as if, because no left or right limits were given as far as punishments that could be doled
Hmm.
out or actions that could be taken against a service member, you had commands that just absolutely went to the max. You had some commands where they just kind of they did their best to prolong it or kind of brush it under the rug so that they didn't make a huge deal out of it, hoping that it would go away. And so you did have good commanders that kind of waited it out. In my case, we did not have good commanders. We had commanders that were willing to go to the maximum extent of what they felt was the law.
Hmm.
So we still had people that, were late on a flu shot, and that was okay. Hey man, just get it. Go to a Walgreens, do something. But when it came to this, people were getting general officers' memorandums of reprimand, it's a career killer for an officer.
Yeah,
You
for
don't
sure.
recover from something like that. Losing rank or being taken off of promotion cycles. Um, you look at what happened with Mark Bashaw. He was court-martialed over something like this. You've got guys. Another friend of mine that I know, he was sent to mental health. Um,
Hmm.
Before that would have raised huge red flags uh, for retaliation or reprisal.
Yep.
But during the COVID-19 stuff, it nobody batted an eye at it. And the problem is there's no recourse in the military. What people didn't understand is you can't you can't file a complaint with HR
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
have your complaint reviewed. You
Yeah.
just you do everything you can. In my case, I was sent to a flying evaluation board to take away my flight status. And they just kept piling it on. And every time we get a win, it seemed like they would turn that into a loss somehow. They would increase the pressure, increase the pressure. And it's interesting because when I finally got my rank back and everything, there were individuals that were absolutely um, upset and put out by the fact that I was able to finally get back what was taken. And that animosity that was created was just something that was new even to me. I did 22 years. I just retired,
Hmm.
and I had never seen people go to those lengths or take sides in such an emotional fashion. It was as though they left logic at the door and they operated purely off of emotion. And
So
that
it's
was,
always wondered. I've always wondered, was that because certain people were put into, given command? A lot of commanders were got those positions because people knew they would, you know, go to that
yeah,
ideological extreme, or were people just scared of their jobs, or all of the above, or what do you
that
think?
was, no, I really think that there was a shift in mentality
Hmm.
amongst many of the officers. And I
Hmm.
think that started during President Obama's tenure.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think that it was by accident. I think it was
Yeah.
deliberate.
Yeah.
And it created a core of officers. I can't say all of them because I had some really good friends that were much more staunch in their approach to protecting their service members, the people that they
Hmm.
had been placed over. Um, but it seemed like the general consensus is you created an officer corps that was they were kind of chameleons.
Yes.
They
Yes.
and we're seeing that now as the remnants
Yes.
that they hunt for them. And unfortunately, you got guys like um, the you know that how do I put it? Almost like a Salem witch hunt. So now we're trying to
Yeah.
weed those people out that are opposing the administration's directives, the ones that are purposely undermining the administration, purposely undermining kind of this turn that the military, especially I can speak for the Army a little bit,
Hmm.
not for the Army in an official capacity, but just from what I
Hmm.
saw, they're they're trying to right the ship, right? So they're trying to turn this big ship around, and then you have people that are purposely punching holes in the boat,
Yeah.
and so it's listing, and then in response, we seems like we're turning this into like a Salem witch trial. So Colonel Butler, um, everybody that I've spoken to and my own personal experience with him was a phenomenal individual. He was
Hmm.
always really polite and kind to my family and I. He was polite and kind to other people that I knew that had interactions with him. He was encouraging. He was not condemning um, when the whole thing with the COVID-19 thing kicked off or people that opposed it. He was welcoming in his demeanor, kind of the things that you would want to see in a leader.
Hmm.
And I don't know. It makes you feel like that proves that um, they're not taking the time necessary to really weed out the individuals that crept in and that gained power during that Obama tenure and then dug in their heels during the first Trump administration and then were just really given carte blanche for Biden's administration. And we saw what happened with the overreaction to the COVID-19 vaccine because that was the directive of the administration and they were going to execute it to the fullest extent,
Yeah.
turning people into criminals for not taking a vaccine. You had guys that got DUIs that didn't get treated the way that people that refused the vaccine did.
It's
And
almost
so,
like it was a bioweapon and they were forcing everybody to take it.
yeah,
You
but
know.
I don't even, it was a weapon, but I maybe not intentionally a bioweapon, but maybe a weapon in that they were able to further weed out the individuals that were not in accordance with that mentality, that mindset that started during the Obama years. Um,
And maybe that's why there's a lot of pushback to getting them back in.
Yes, absolutely, because you have
Yeah.
people that are dragging their feet. When the same people, so everybody's tried to go through the BCMR, right? the Board of Correction and Military Records, the same people that were willing to uphold these regulations and do things, now those people are supposed to make decisions based for people's records that were punished or removed during the COVID-19 debacle, right? You can't do that. Those people have
Yeah.
to go.
So I hear that there's a lot of inequities among the results of the board.
Oh
Is that a
yeah.
true statement?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, I can't officially say I was the first, but I was one of the first to get any type of relief.
Hmm.
And my hope was all this money, my wife and I spent like 40 plus $1,000, right? We
Hmm.
hoped that all of this money we spent would kind of pave the way and open the doors for other people. And then we saw with Lieutenant Colonel Long, she was brought on, and Mark Bashaw was brought back afterward. And so we kind of got excited. People got their hopes up. It was being talked about. And then it's not made any more real significant or substantial progress. And you
Is that
wonder
just
if,
is that just in the Army or is it across the services? Do you know?
I don't know across services. I know on the Army side. And then, like I said, people that I
Mhm.
communicated with both before, I'm thinking of a very particular person. Now they've just kind of cut off communications with me. Um, and uh, I don't speak for Chase, but when he and I spoke, he echoed that same sentiment.
Hmm.
So why you think about in terms of like battlefield communications, right? Um,
Hmm.
if you cut off the communication, if you give your enemy hope, you can lure them into a place where that communication can be cut off,
Hmm.
and then you can reduce their effectiveness, right?
Hmm.
So is that the point? Are they reducing our effectiveness to communicate because now that they've been pulled into this scenario or this position, now they're being told, hey, you can't communicate these things to the outside. If you want this to be effective, you need to keep it local, in-house. We do things here. We don't want you communicating outside. And so, in their own, are they thinking that they now they don't want to communicate, they want to uphold that so that they don't inadvertently sabotage the whole process. But you have people on the outside that got their hopes up, like, oh great, we're finally making this progress, and then we're back to silence, we're
Yeah.
back to very little movement, we're back to but what they were able to do is you go on X now and it's not as prominent on X. You go on
Yeah.
X and people aren't getting blasted by name. You know, people aren't calling out Stu Scheller. People aren't calling out Tata as much. People aren't calling out, and so the negative press has been dialed back. And I wonder if that was the goal all along.
Interesting.
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
A warm welcome here at the National Press Club. Welcome to the journalists, welcome to the Embraer team, and welcome to the other guests that we have here. I'm going to announce, and as some of you guessed it right when they came in, the first E2 order by an American operator. And that operator is Avello. We believe this is really a strategic shift to unlock profitability for the customer. I'm very pleased that we have Andrew Levy here as the CEO of Avello, and I'm very pleased to give the stage to share a little bit more about what Avello is going to do with the E2 195. Thank you very much.
Couldn't be more excited to be here as part of this historic announcement. We have such a great cultural fit as companies, so we're very, very excited to be Embraer's newest customer. We launched our airline in April of 21, and our target is focusing on small secondary airports of large metro areas. We've carried over 8 million customers since we started on 63,000 flights. And we've done all these things with 1,200 of the greatest crew members I could ever imagine having, and many of them are here with me today. This is the right airplane for us. It's going to open up opportunities for us that no other aircraft can serve. The best thing about the airplane, of course, is you will not find a middle seat on this airplane. It doesn't exist. We won't have any to offer. It's going to be the best cabin in the United States, and we're so excited about that. This is going to elevate our experience to the highest level, and we think our customers are absolutely going to love the airplane.
Um,
Well, we're gonna pursue this at the Pentagon level and ask some questions because
Man,
we're on the Pentagon press corps. But that will be definitely try to get to the bottom of that. But
yeah,
I am hearing that the Marines have done better, but I don't know. If
yeah,
that's true or
I
not.
hope so. The Marine Corps, they operate on so little already.
Mhm,
They need people that's what the Marine Corps has always stood on, are
mhm.
principled individuals
Yeah.
and guys that are willing to watch each other's back. I mean, that whole thing, once a Marine, always Marine, all the way back to Chosen Reservoir. You
Mhm.
know, you, I would hope that they are able to kind of overcome some of this and really make it work. But, you would hope the Army is able to do that as well.
You would think.
Um, yeah, and we need good people. We need to keep people like General Sage. We need to keep people, and of course, these are my opinions, but um, Colonel Butler, we need to keep people like that and put them in places where they can serve. In my case, General George, when he called me, um, he was on a plane and he was headed to DC, and he called me and he just real quick, we talked, and he's like, Brandon, if I'd been there, I wouldn't have let this happen. He said he remembered me because I flew him around more than once when he
Mhm,
was the I Corps commander at Fort Lewis. I was one of the senior warrant officers in my company, and so myself and Greg Davis, the other senior warrant officer, we were chosen as
mhm,
Chalk 1 and Chalk 2, the
mhm,
pilot in command for those two aircraft, so that we could fly him around. I have his coin, and
mhm,
he said very specifically, I'm going to fix your record and what happened to you, and when I do, I need you to make me a promise. And I said,
mhm,
anything, sir. He said, I want you to stay on and help me fix the records of other people. And I said,
mhm,
absolutely.
mhm,
And now I'm retired, and it wasn't for lack of trying. I reminded people multiple times that I was asked to do this and that I'm more than willing to do so, and
mhm.
I never got a response.
Yeah, that's the way it rolls. Well, I think we just need more public pressure. I think you're right. A lot of it has died down on social media, so that's and some of it may be there's a lot of throttling going on. So
But
you
this
don't
could
know.
serve a purpose for
Yeah.
Secretary Hegseth. He's trying to weed these people out. Who better to do it than the people that were willing to oppose those people that he's looking for?
So what
You
happened
know,
to Butler? Why was he relieved?
yes, and that just doesn't make any sense.
Hmm.
But you have guys like Sam Shoemate. Sam started Terminal CWO, that site,
Yeah,
and
I
he
know.
was ousting people that were, all of those types of people are the people that they need. Those are the people that will do the digging. Those are the people that are going to give you the correct information so that you don't make mistakes when you fire people. Those are
Hmm.
the people that are going to count.
Hmm.
And now those are the people that are out.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
out. Sam's out. Like, you you have to keep the people around that are willing to be responsible and thorough and have their ear to the ground.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you make mistakes and it turns into Salem witch trials 2.0, and we just start ruining the careers of good officers.
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing before during COVID. We don't want to repeat that.
Interesting. So to I think we've covered that extensively. Let's talk aviation for a minute.
Yeah, sure.
You've got some ideas on Army aviation, and you presented those and didn't have a good response. But what are you talking about on that? On
So,
that?
Army aviation is terribly expensive. It's the most expensive thing the Army does.
Hmm.
In my case, a Black Hawk, I think a rotor blade's $249,000. You have an engine that's $750,000. You
Hmm.
have avionics components. I think the ESIS, the emergency situation indicating system, that part that Dan Driscoll held up when he was talking, that's a $40,000 part. So for too long, the Army has allowed contracting companies, defense contractors, to dictate the
Hmm.
price of things, to dictate how things are replaced. And by that I mean, when Secretary Driscoll made the comment that this $15 knob requires a replacement of this $40,000 part,
Hmm.
um, that's only because that's the way that it's been designed.
Right.
So the system, because nobody's ever checked the system, has been designed that way so that people can line their pockets. And when I was a production control officer, what I started doing is we had a machine shop that was run by a civilian company. We had um, a paint booth. We had the ability to refurbish rotor blades, to refurbish stabilator sections, all these things that were terribly expensive. They could make the bushings
Hmm.
for the stabilator sections. They could take a rotor blade and they could uh, sand it down, re-stencil it, repaint it, rebalance it, and get it ready to go right back on an aircraft, and it looked like a brand new rotor blade
Yeah.
instead of replacing a rotor blade, right? Um, and so I started doing that in just my little corner of the Army, Fort Lewis, with 30 helicopters there, and then we had 5 over at Yakima Training Center.
Hmm.
Um, the I think it was something like $11 million I was able to save
Wow.
just in my little corner of the Army. And so that got me thinking, if it's so expensive, and I had spoken to some people um, from the Pentagon, I got a call one day. Uh, if it was so expensive to do those things, why weren't we looking at ways to refurbish, rebuild, or remake our own parts?
Hmm.
Aviation's a kind of a touchy animal because you're sticking aircraft in the sky. Some of
Hmm.
these aircraft, these aircraft components, they're considered critical flight components. If they're critical flight components, they have to be tested. They have to, but certain components, like when Secretary Driscoll held up that knob, as long as it functions as a knob, is not a critical flight component.
Right.
The ESIS, as long as you can manipulate that knob, you're good. That tail cone that he held up from an external fuel tank, that tail cone, if it flies off, the aircraft's not going to crash. But
Hmm.
if you can make it for a fifth of the cost,
Right.
um, why not do it that way? And so, with the money that I was able to save with these refurbishing um, steps that I had taken, and it gave me the idea. And so, what I did is I created an entire product showing how not only could we reduce the cost of Army Aviation by 35 to 45%, um, we could make units more self-sustainable, so they would be able to deploy to austere environments, set
Hmm.
up their maintenance area, and have an entire machine shop that included 3D printing. Um, there's there's high intensity. You can temper components after you've 3D printed metal. You can 3D print titanium. You can then temper them so that it takes out the voids and it aligns the grain structure so that they're strong
Hmm.
enough for
Hmm.
the requirement. You could do all those things. So now you're creating your own parts. You can 3D scan. You can X-ray for cracks. You can do all of these things all on your own, and you don't have to rely on Boeing or Lockheed or some
Right.
of these other manufacturers that are manufacturing these parts. And so now you don't have parts that are backed up. Now you've cut the cost of those components, because and then the other thing that I suggested, you create a database, right? So a unit with an engineer creates a component that can be uploaded to the database, so that some unit that's in a complete other part of the world
Sure.
can pull from that database and pull that component into the machine and have it either CNC'd or printed right there in front of them. And they don't have to go through the design process again because it's already been designed and approved by an engineer. So that would cut cost. And when I did the simulations, the estimate was 35 to 45%.
That's billions of dollars.
Yes, without cutting effectiveness. That was the important part.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
The first time ever, we're bringing you My Pillow mattresses and mattress toppers for as low as $99.98. Remember, sleep's all about temperature and pressure points. Whatever sleep needs you have, we have the right technology for you. Like our My Pillow mattress topper, our queen size has over 10,000 individual comfort supports to help relieve your pressure points. And how about our 3-inch Hybrid Plus mattress topper? It's infused with copper and silver to help your body get the restorative sleep it needs. And our My Pillow and Case Coil mattresses, I personally helped develop these mattresses to make sure they have everything needed to give us great sleep. Plus, they're made right here in the USA, and they ship right to your front door absolutely free. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to get MyPillow mattresses and toppers for as low as $99.98 and free shipping.
I was going to say, I was at Fort Bragg at the Joint Innovation Outpost where they're doing a lot of this, throw a bunch of stuff on the table where Army Aviation or military and academia and industry get together and try to solve real-time problems in the field. And you've got Hexeth really pushing for new unicorn defense contractors and kind of pushing out the old legacy processes. And that's really, I think, for new equipment, but it sounds like that whole thing should be applied to the, as you say, just maintenance.
Yeah, with AI and with some of these systems that can be put in place, a part can be, without ever being produced, can be tested in a simulated stress scenario. It can be tested in a simulated wind tunnel. You can get data before the part is ever created in real life.
Yeah.
So that you have an idea of what will happen when you create that part, and then you can test it in real life and see how close you were, right? So you could go from nothing to something in a very short amount of time. And the more you do that, the larger this database would get, and the more ability units would have to be self-sustaining, right?
Well, that would take an up armor of not intellect but technical skill, but that would be a good thing, right?
No, it would be a good thing, and that was the whole point. That was part of my proposal, is that you start training Army service members in a different way. So now they're not just parts changers, and then you pair them with an engineer from Lockheed or from Boeing, or because we already work with individuals anyways, representatives of those companies. We already do it. So now you could have an engineer that's at every post that deploys with the unit. That way, if you've got an aerospace engineer there, they can look at these systems, and then you've got a kid there that knows how to run a machine, that knows how to, whether it's a CNC machine or a 3D printing machine or whatever it might be. We've started to get into advanced composites because of UAVs, so not fiberglass, but carbon fibers and titanium reinforced carbon fibers, graphite reinforced carbon fibers. So all of these components and these advanced materials, those can all be done at the unit level. We already have, the way the Army structure, we already have an aviation support battalion. So if that aviation support battalion, rather than just working on helicopters, had an entire machine shop where all of these things were available to them, 3D scanners, X-ray machines, they could start creating components. And then the next part of my proposal was to stop making aviation units, essentially. Let's put these aviation units, let's directly embed them with the ground force commander. No longer are they a reachback asset. Now they're an integrated asset. Ground force commanders, there were lots of times we would go to NTC or something, and ground force commanders just, some of them, I can't say all of them, some of them would struggle to understand in a training scenario how to best integrate an aviation unit, right? And so we would get relegated to flying MREs around the training space.
Yeah.
But if they're directly integrated, like their motor pools or something else, then now all of our aviators are working directly with ground force commanders and platoon leaders. And what can you give us? How can this be integrated into our training plan? And then in real life scenario, because it's already integrated into the training plan, now it's integrated into the battle space. And now we've given a ground force commander infinite ability to move his troops at lightning speed over all sorts of terrain. You can't, you're not going to load it right now. You're not going to get soldiers to get on UAV Blackhawk. and
Mhm.
fly to a point for an air assault. They
Yeah.
just, you have to have that trust there. And
Sure.
Army ground troops, our infantrymen, they trust Army aviators, warrant officers. They know that those
Mhm.
guys are there for them. They have just as much to lose, and so they get on those aircraft and they go into combat, right? So, and then what I did after that proposal, because I made a proposal to restructure the way that we integrate with that ground force commander. We create a planning cell. We do all of these things so that now it's seamless.
Mhm.
Then my next what I did to prove this out is there are companies, like you said, Secretary Driscoll is pushing for it, Secretary Hegseth's pushing for it, and there are AI companies that already exist, and I used a particular one in what are called Monte Carlo simulations.
Mhm.
And what I did is I drew from a scenario that was a very real scenario that happened in Army history, and we have historical data that helped me create the opposition, right? I
Mhm.
used this historical data, and that was the Yadrang Valley. What was it, November
Mhm.
of 1964 or 5, right?
Mhm.
That was kind of the advent of Army air assault
Sure.
and the beginning of Army air assault doctrine. They figured out that Hueys at the time were great at putting troops on target.
Yeah.
So that's why I used it, because there was a historical significance to it, and then because there were well established troop numbers. Um, And in my Monte Carlo simulation, I used just two 10-man fire teams with three Blackhawks. One Blackhawk was a UAV Blackhawk that was tethered to the two lead Blackhawks that carried the fire teams. And those fire teams were integrated with VR, virtual
Mhm.
reality, um, and then a UAV suite that was transported in the third UAV, the automated Blackhawk, and
Mhm.
it would be on a pallet. And so each member of those fire teams would have a small UAS asset that would accompany them, and then they would have overhead UAS assets, and then they would have additional UAS assets that had sensor suites on them that could detect enemy forces, whether
Mhm.
they were in a cave, underground, whatever it might be, right? And then though that could be communicated to VR headsets. And anyway, so I wrote all this up. I drew it all out, ran the Monte Carlo simulations, and with just 20 guys essentially, it was 65%, if I remember correctly, no casualties, complete and total victory.
Wow.
So,
Well,
and that's, of course, it's a simulation, right? And you can make a simulation say anything, but there are ways. And so we save money because we continue using the Blackhawk, right? We just upgrade it.
mhm.
Two, we save lives because now we're sending small UAS into places that troops would normally go. Three, we're able to communicate better because now we have troops that can see right in their headset. They're able to see what these UAS all around them are seeing. And so they know exactly where the bad guy's at. Three, you have Blackhawks that can stay on station and act as command and control. So
Mhm.
now they become like a mothership, right? And so you have one of them is the main, the other one's the backup, just in case there's a equipment malfunction or something terrible happens, catastrophic. There's still a central point that those UAS are reporting to. It turns 20 guys into what would have been 300 guys. But you cannot do it without Army Aviation. You cannot do it with UAS alone, and you cannot do it without Army Aviation.
Hmm.
So um,
So
it is,
that threatens a lot of power structures, and your other ideas threaten a lot of money. So,
yes,
what was the response that you got?
none. No response. So, and that's why Colonel Butler's a great, because he was super supportive when I'm like, "Hey, sir, I'm leaving the Army. Nobody took me up on this offer to help with reinstating people. I'm leaving the Army, but I feel like there's more that I need to do. There's
Mhm.
these things going on in Army Aviation. It is a bad idea to move toward essentially eliminating much of Army Aviation. We can do without the Apache. I know it probably makes a lot of people upset because UAVs can do that stuff. UAS can do that stuff, right? but we cannot load troops and put them on target in a UAS right now. It's just, you can have some kid sitting in a Connex far removed from the battle space. His life's not in jeopardy. He does not have the same skin in the game as a warrant officer, an officer sitting in the cockpit, or a crew chief sitting on at the 240s. You know,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
the this we can make this work, and we can make it work for cheaper, and we can make 20 guys fight like 300 guys with the technology that is coming down the pipeline now, and with these new defense contractors that aren't, they're developing equipment on their own, they're developing technologies on their own, they're not getting billion-dollar contracts to develop something that ends up failing or
Yeah.
has to
Or
be
way late,
reiterated several
failed
times.
fast. Right.
What?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Why? And we could make a ground force commander, we could make an infantry unit so efficiently deadly that nobody would dare challenge us because it was so well integrated. And they would be swift, they would be severe in the application of violence, enough so that it would dissuade the enemies of the United States from taking action. And we can only do that with an integrated aviation asset. It is not in the Army's best interest, in my opinion, to cut aviation as much as they are. They just need to get smarter about the way they apply aviation, and they'll
So
save money.
I want to get some press out on our site on all of this. It's great ideas. So think about how
Yeah.
we can do that. So,
Well, I've got those products.
mhm.
I've sent them to other people. I just, nobody's ever taken me up on it, and I know it's gone to individuals at the head of Army Aviation, but
Mhm.
nobody takes me up on it. I had one person um, who asked me to stay in the Army to work for Army Futures Command, but I think they've changed the name now. Um, but that asset, that entity, only makes suggestions to the Army,
Mhm.
and then it's up to everybody else above them to implement, which doesn't seem to happen. Um, we need people in a space where real change can be made, because you look, they're doing this buildup because this, the posturing for Iran. If Army Aviation and Army Infantry were so swift and so violent in their action, there's a country like Iran would wouldn't dare
Yeah.
challenge, because it could happen so fast. They would be overrun and taken out, that it would be suicidal for them to even posture the way that they are.
Well,
But
I'm an Air Force guy, but it's a very similar story to Billy Mitchell, and after World War One, who said,
yeah,
all these battleships are going to be targets, and it's not the future, and aviation is the future, and he was fired for that.
yeah.
But anyway,
But look what happens when the Army lets people innovate. You look
yeah,
at, do you know the story of Pappy Gunn?
no,
So Pappy Gunn was single-handedly responsible for the creation of multiple iterations of, what was it, the B-17? The which aircraft was it? Anyways, because his family had been, MacArthur was super arrogant. The
hmm,
Japanese will never attack here. He didn't fortify Manila. Pappy Gunn was flying for Philippine Air at the time. 40-year-old man. He had been in aviation. Um, and his family was taken and put in an internment camp by the Japanese, right? And so
hmm,
his whole goal was to get them back and to save his family.
hmm,
He put 8 50 cal machine guns in the nose of a bomber, and they said that will never work. Engineers everywhere, that will never work. He proved it would work, and because he proved it would work, um, it created new variants of that aircraft.
mm,
The Army allowed for innovation because the right officers were in charge. And when
yes,
people said no, Pappy Gunn said, watch, hold my beer, watch
hmm,
this.
yeah,
And it got to the point, I think at one point they had 12 50 cals in the nose of these bombers. Then he put a tank from a Sherman tank, he put the main gun in the nose of a bomber and was sinking Japanese ships with it. You know, because before then they were just dropping bombs and the ships would just turn and the bombs would more often than not they would miss, right?
Yeah.
Well, he did something that they said couldn't be done, and it was because the Army allowed for innovation. That's been stifled because of all these massive contracts and so many people that are getting paid. That innovation is dead. And so when I create all these products, you know, I'm sure nobody gives a shit. They don't care. You know,
Well, the
that
problem is there's been no media accountability. So that's what we're trying
yeah,
to change. So and
yeah.
I'm actually optimistic with some of the changes that Hegseth's made in the Pentagon with a lot of this media stuff. So
I would
that
love to present to Secretary Hegseth, you know, um, these products that I've created. It's the way forward.
yeah.
We could make Army aviation more efficient and more deadly and more functional than it's ever been. We could,
Well, on that note, Brandon, let's end it there. But I want to have you back and let's talk about this more in depth. But good luck with your flight training. I know you've.
yeah,
Thank you, Brandon. We'll have you back.
yeah. God bless.
Take care.